Welcome to the Day's Adventure Podcast. I'm your host, David Visser, and in this episode 9 of the Woven in Courage series, The Aftermath of Silence. In our last episode, we stood with the resistance, hidden in spinning rooms, waiting in attics, passing messages beneath candlelight, on the edge of an ambush that would shake the nation. Now, we step into the days that followed, the silence after the shots, the fear that crept into every home, the retaliation that scorched the soul of the Netherlands. This episode is not just about what happened, it's about what it cost. And now, even in the face of death, ordinary people chose to resist with quiet courage, with faith, and with fire. Let's turn the page. The reckoning begins now. Last time, we stood on the edge of history, spinning wool by candlelight, decoding sermons, and waiting for a signal in the dark. Now, in episode 9, we enter the aftermath of silence. It began with a mission. Simple, quiet, unassuming. Intercept a German convoy, rumored to carry food and munitions. But what happened next would unleash one of the most devastating reprisals in Dutch history. A blow to the Nazi regime that struck deeper than anyone expected. And a cost that the village, the province, and the country would carry forever. This isn't just about an ambush. This is about what comes after. March 1945. The frost was beginning to retreat, but fear, it stayed. And in the quiet town of Westerhove, nestled among forest and farmland, 5 Dutch resistance fighters stepped into the road, raised their weapons, and unknowingly altered the course of history. Their plan was simple: intercept a German truck believed to be carrying food and ammunition. Another daring act of sabotage. Another night raid against the occupiers who had taken everything. The night air was damp with thaw. The scent of pine sap mingled with the smoke of a wood stove. Somewhere, an owl cried out once, then silence. The men moved into position, along the bend in the road, crouched behind hedgerows and low trees, hearts thundering louder than the wind. One held a signal lamp, another a rusted pistol wrapped in rags. The ground beneath them was cold and soft. Their breaths came out in steam. The sound came first, a low rumble, the crunch of tires on frost-hardened gravel. The truck. Then the flash. A spotlight swept the woods. One man raised a hand, the signal. The cart rolled onto the road, blocking the path, shouts in German, then a burst of gunfire. The ambush was on. A resistance fighter was hit in the shoulder. Another fired back, striking the front of the vehicle. Screams, glass shattered. The truck swerved and hit the ditch and tipped over. Inside, not just food and ammunition. SS General Hans Albin Rauter. The resistance fighters didn't know. They weren't looking for a general. They were desperate for rations, for stolen supplies, something, anything to feed the people hiding in safe houses and barns. In the chaos, they managed to grab only a few loaves of bread from the overturned vehicle before fleeing into the woods. They didn't stay to search. They didn't realize who they had struck. But what they had just done What they had just set in motion would echo for generations. So who was Hans Albin Rauter? He wasn't just a Nazi bureaucrat. He was the top SS police leader in the Netherlands, Hitler's man, Himmler's right hand. He masterminded the deportation of more than 100,000 Jews from the Netherlands, most of whom perished in camps. He initiated Operation Zildentana. This was a series of assassinations carried out by Dutch SS volunteers and Nazi collaborators targeting members of the Dutch resistance and suspected anti-German individuals. He also ordered the murder of innocent Dutch civilians as a punishment for resistance attacks. He was also responsible for the deportation of over 400,000 Dutch laborers to Germany, 34,000 of those who never returned. Rauter's cruelty was personal. He signed death warrants himself. He ordered collective punishments that defied even Nazi protocol. Entire villages punished for whispers. Execution in broad daylight, roundups for reprisal. And yet, in the moment before he was struck, he was just a passenger in a car, heading back from a conference. There were no flags, no guards, just a vehicle on a frozen road. And in one moment, fate intersected with resistance. He was shot, badly wounded. His driver and aide were killed, and the forest for a moment exploded with violence, then fell silent. The men who had planned the raid slipped back into the woods, cold mud on their boots, adrenaline flooding their lungs. They believed they had hit a supply truck. They didn't know they had nearly severed the head of the Nazi occupation. So what does this have to do with my grandfather? Well, let's turn to his journal. March 5th. Dunkey spun all day. The minister came twice. Rauter was pale. The sermon was cancelled. Burgess brought a note marked red. "We must not be seen," it said. "They will pass through the forest by dawn." This is the eve of the ambush, the coded phrases, the cancelled meeting, all the signs that something was happening beneath the surface. Then, this.
March 6th. Seek. Left before sunrise. I kept the lamp off. The code is clean. I will wait.
Seek, Rauter, Top, and Burgess. The names that have circled this story for months now. The men who passed the books, who moved the wool, who stayed late after sermons, not for tea, but for maps, and prayers whispered like strategy. And now, March 6th, the day Rauter's car was ambushed. Resistance archives confirmed the location, the timing, the plan. They weren't trying to assassinate a general. They were trying to intercept supplies. But in doing so, they struck a monster, and they didn't even know it. What came next would haunt the Netherlands. But that's for the next section. Because first, we need to sit in the silence. The stillness between the shot and the reckoning.
March 7th. Zylstra came at dusk. The rooster did not crow. I will write nothing more today.
He had spun the wool. He had passed the pages. He had opened his door when Rauter knocked. We now believe with high certainty that he was part of the planning, or the courier in the chain, or the spinning wheel that wove this moment into being. And whether by candlelight or radio whisper, he knew what happened that night and what it would cost. In the next section, we'll explore the aftermath, the names, the numbers, the grief that followed. Because in March of 1945, the Dutch resistance delivered a blow to the Nazi machine, and the Nazis responded with fire. In the days following the ambush at Wusterhove, silence wasn't just a state of being. It became a shield, a necessity, a veil of mourning pulled tight across the country. No one knew what would come next, but everyone feared it. In Groningen, the mood changed overnight. My grandfather's entries grow shorter, more guarded. The names stop appearing. The fire is kept low. The sermons are sparse. He writes,
March 8th, 1945. Denki whispered today. Spinning only. Rauter hasn't come. Eski is not well. The air is wrong.
There was an ache behind those words, an instinct, because news was beginning to travel, not about a food truck, not about a successful raid, but about the man they had shot, General Hans Albin Rauter, still alive, but barely. The German command was furious. The Gestapo and Green Police scrambled to respond. Rumors swirled that a massive retaliation was coming, but no one knew where or when, only that it would be swift, brutal, and public. And in resistance circles across the Netherlands, a new wave of dread settled in.
March 9th, 1945. Zelstra stood at the door. He didn't enter. He said only this: they've begun.
In cities all across the Netherlands, including Groningen, 263 Dutch prisoners were rounded up. Not just fighters, not just men, but teachers, students, sons, fathers, people already marked for their beliefs, their affiliations, and their defiance. They were pulled from cells, from transport lists, from hospital beds, and they were executed efficiently without trial. The cost of resistance had just become incalculable. And yet, it did not break them. That's the part we don't talk about enough. Not just the grief, but the determination, the fierce, trembling resolve. In my grandfather's journal, there's a page that definitely jumps out.
March 11th, 1945. Burgess returned, only briefly. Eski prepared the fire again. The wool will not stop. We are not finished.
And then there was this.
They buried them outside the city, my friends. We were not allowed near. But when the sun rose, the ground was covered in flowers, hundreds of them. Not one saw who placed them, but everybody knew why.
Even after Rauter's ambush unleashed hell across the country, the spinning didn't stop. The coded books kept circulating, the sermons returned, and my grandfather kept writing. He knew the risk. He had felt the closeness of death, heard it in the quiet knock of a messenger, smelled it in the smoke rising from the fields, but still he stayed. He fought quietly in the shadows, with wool, with words, with silence. In the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll go into the names, the places, the individuals, and the communities left trying to hold the pieces together. We'll explore how this single act of resistance sparked a fire of vengeance and how it shaped the final weeks of occupation. Because March 1945 wasn't about endings, it was about reckoning. After the liberation of the Netherlands in May of 1945, as flags were raised and children emerged from hiding, the ghost of occupation still roamed the land. But one ghost, one name, was hunted with purpose. Hans Albin Rauter. He had survived the ambush at Wusterhove, gravely wounded, yet still alive. As Nazi command collapsed across Europe, Rauter attempted to vanish into the wreckage. But justice found him. He was arrested by British forces later that year, and in 1948 he was put on trial by a Dutch court at The Hague. This was not just a trial, it was a national reckoning. The courtroom was packed. Survivors, witnesses, relatives of the 263 Dutch men executed in retaliation for the ambush. And Rauter? He stood unflinching, surrounded by the echoes of his own orders that had deported over 100,000 Jews, sent 400,000 Dutch to labor in Germany, and killed innocent civilians in cold blood. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. Instead, he offered justification. He claimed he didn't know the Jews were being exterminated. He insisted that deporting students and civilians was a military necessity. He argued that the Dutch had forfeited their rights by resisting, and thus reprisals were legally justified. At one point, he even said, "If the Dutch people have suffered, I offer myself as a sacrifice for peace." His words echoed hollow. Desperate attempts at redemption in a courtroom that already knew the truth. As the prosecutors laid out the scope of his crimes, photographs, deportation lists, orders signed by his own hand, the mask of legality he tried to wear crumbled. One observer wrote that Rauter did not exhibit remorse, he exhibited calculation. And that brings up the fitting words of Captain G. M. Gilbert, the Army psychologist at the Nuremberg trials. In my work with defendants, I was searching for the nature of evil, and I now think I have come close to defining it: a lack of empathy. It's the one characteristic that connects all the defendants, a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow man. Evil, I think, is the absence of empathy. And that absence hung heavy in the courtroom. The Dutch judges saw it, the people heard it, and the sentence came down swift and final. Death. Rauter was executed by firing squad in 1949. A man who once held all of the Netherlands in fear died alone, unwept, by the nation he had tried to break. In the final section of this episode, we return to the journal, to the wool, to the whispered prayers that didn't stop, even when the war knocked at the door, because the threads of resistance were never just weapons. They were reminders that even in darkness, we are not alone. March turned into April. The snow began to melt, but what lay beneath it was not hope. It was fear, footsteps, shells, a silence that no longer protected, but warned. The writing in my grandfather's journal became fragmented now, each line written like a breath stolen between alarms. He speaks of spinning, yes, but also of silence, of smoke, of rooms so still you could hear the mice in the walls.
March 29th, 1945. Burgess stayed too long. He said little Denki cried. The wool is thinning. We use bark now to stretch it. April 1st, 1945. Ram was here. He had bruises. The lab was closed. The cellar smells like metal. April 3rd, 1945. We traded 2 sequins for a little grain. It was barely enough. The children upstairs coughed blood again. No fire tonight. Not even a candle.
These aren't just words, they're survival. The last acts of a people waiting for the door to splinter, for boots to stomp through the kitchen floorboards. But there is more than fear. There is resolve. Because they know something is coming. They feel it in the wind, in the shift of faces of neighbors, in the way collaborators begin to vanish from the streets. And in these pages, among the whispered sermons and the coded scripture, we find one last line that ties it all together.
April 4th, 1945. The map has passed. We marked the milk house. The spinning ends tomorrow.
The milk house, we now know, was used to hide supplies and sometimes people. It would be burned by retreating Germans in the coming days. But in this moment, it was a rally point, a symbol, a quiet declaration that even as the walls closed in, they would not give up. The Allies are close. Canadian and British forces are pushing into the north. Skirmishes erupted on the outskirts of Groningen, and yet inside the city, families huddled. The resistance held its breath. My grandfather continued to spin, yarn, lies, and hope.
April 6th, 1945. The Tommies were near. We do not sleep. Ram watches from the roof. April 7th, 1945. The church bell rang at dusk. That hasn't happened in weeks. Seek said it's time. We are to carry the last of it to the old barn. April 9th, 1945. The sky cracked today. Tanks smoke. They stayed under the floor. Someone bled on the stairs. We did not speak.
Historically, the Battle of Groningen began in full on April 13th, 1945, but the signs were there even earlier. The Germans, desperate and cornered, turned Groningen into a stronghold. They blew bridges, mined roads, and burned food reserves. Entire neighborhoods became battlefields. The NSB fled or turned in on their own. The civilians, many already starving, now found themselves trapped between collapsing walls and collapsing armies. In the city's dairy plant, Groningen's main milk reserve was destroyed by the German forces. The hunger, already unbearable, became something else: desperation. And still, my grandfather writes,
April 10th, 1945. I slept in the wool pile. It is quiet, too quiet, but the sky glows at night now. It's close.
This is the cliff's edge. This is what it looked like, the final hours before liberation. But before freedom came hell. In the next episode of Woven in Courage, the Battle of Groningen begins. Bullets fly through barns. Milk reserves shatter in the streets. German soldiers run, then return, desperate and vengeful. And in the middle of it all, my grandfather, still hiding, still helping. This is episode 9. The end of the occupation is near, but war has come home. Join me next time as we walk the burning streets, trace the final acts of sabotage, and open the journal to the day the war arrived on my grandfather's doorstep. This is Woven in Courage. that's it for this episode of the Day's Adventure. Remember, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop chasing the next great adventure. The world is full of wonders, and your next journey is just one episode away. To keep the adventure alive, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video versions and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Want more? Hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss the next thrilling episode. The world's waiting. See you next time on the Day's Adventure.